So Vivian, would you like to tell us a little bit about yourself?
Okay, I'm Vivian Stockman. I've been with the Ohio Valley Environmental Coalition, or OVEC, since about 1995. And I got involved as a volunteer when the pulp mill was coming to an area near where I live. And that's how I first started. And I worked so much on that issue that eventually they were like, okay, we'll hire you. And started part-time and eventually came on full-time.
So tell us about OVEC. Tell us about your organization.
Well, OVEC started in 1987, so we're celebrating our 30th year this year. And we started when the BASF Corporation was considering bringing all of its toxic waste from North America and either incinerating or burying in a low-income community near Huntington, West Virginia. So this was before my time with OVEC, of course, but Diane Beatty was sort of the visionary founder of OVEC, and people gathered around a kitchen table and figured out what to do and worked on the issue until, in fact, they stopped BASF's plans. And then, sadly, there were other environmental issues to deal with. So over the years, we've tackled quite a few. There was the Ashland oil issue, a refinery near our offices in OVEC. That was an 8-year battle that resulted in one of the biggest settlements at that time with the Department of Justice, and video monitoring, which was some of the first in the nation for that. So, we've been working for quite a while on defending the water and the land and the air of this area. So I got involved, of course, on the pulp mill issue, and as we were coming to basically a win on that issue, the pulp mill never got built, we started learning about mountaintop removal coal mining. And so that's where I focused many years of my work with OVEC on that particular issue, which has a whole subset of issues in terms of water pollution and the whole toll of coal from cradle to grave, as they say.
So how much of OVEC's work is related to water quality advocacy?
I'd say a huge portion of our work is about defending the water, whether it's the mountaintop removal issue, fracking issues, toxic waste, as the early days were, so much of it is related to water pollution and maintaining, where we do have clean water.
So could you tell us a story or an interaction that might have stood out to you that is related to water quality?
There's so many. One of the things that stood out to me in the early years had to do with coal slurry. So we got some word of some problems in Mingo County in southern West Virginia, and went down to meet with folks, and there was a couple people in particular, I'll say in the community of Rawl, and I went in to visit with some folks and just to learn some of what they were going through and if they could share what was going on. And I was walking into the home, just an immaculate, really nice home, but there was an overwhelming, overpowering odor, which I learned later was hydrogen sulfide, and the odor was coming from the water. And this particular family and all the families in the community used to have really sweet well water. I mean, it was just, highly potable, just fine. Nobody, everybody thought it was fine, but nobody ever worried that something was going to happen to it. But then one day, the fellow in this particular house noticed, he turned on the faucet and stuff ran out that was black. And he's like, that's coal fines. He worked at a coal prep plant. And a coal prep plant is where you wash the coal to prepare it for market. So fast forward several years, the water is getting worse and worse in all these community members, and people are up and down every little hollow in these 4 Mingo County communities. They're getting sick, and they're children with rare, something like gallbladder problems, something that is rare in a child. and all kinds of strange cancers, and just every household. And people were all on well water there. So the Massey Energy had been operating raw sales and processing, which was a plant that had a coal sludge impoundment where sludge is stored in this giant lagoon up above, on the mountains above the community, but also it was injecting this coal prep plant waste or slurry underground. And it had injected over time billions of gallons of this waste. And the West Virginia Department of Environmental Protection permitted it. But, when we were asking DEP about it or coal company officials or whatever, we're injecting it underground. It's going into abandoned coal shafts, deep mines, and it doesn't migrate. It stays there. Like water travel underground. What a concept! But people knew full well that it was the prep plant, and so people in the community took 13, 14 years trying to get water, city water, piped in to replace their well water, and they also tried to get some action in terms of getting their health taken care of and getting replacement water. Lawsuits, and we helped organize all kinds of visits to the West Virginia legislature, but and finally, after lots of citizen involvement and convincing the legislators that what was happening was real, the people did get city water piped in, and people's health has been improving since then. But in this particular home, as I would visit over the years, I would invariably get tired because the hydrogen sulfide fumes will do that. I'm a person that never naps, but once I just said to Carmen, Ernie, can I lay down? And I just laid down on their floor and went to sleep because they're living with this every single day. And the really terrible part of it is that, Carm could stand at her sink and have to wash the dishes in this terrible water. And then she could look up in the hill and see Massey CEO at that time, his little mansion up on the hill. And when he moved in that mansion, he got city water right away. Meanwhile, the people had to struggle and be poisoned and organize and beg and plead and cajole and sue to finally get some city water. But, so she could stand there being poisoned by the water that, used to be fine water, stand there being poisoned and looked up at that guy's castle on the mountain, and in some, more flip moments, it was kind of like, he's like Mr. Burns in The Simpsons. He's up there on the hill looking down on the people he's poisoning. A lot of people from the communities in Mingo County came and talked with legislators, told them their stories, and the legislators were moved to tears. And finally, we succeeded in getting a West Virginia State Senate hearing on coal sludge injections. And there were a series of 4 of them. The coal industry was incredulous that the citizens had managed to get a hearing, and eventually new injections were banned. Ongoing injections were not. So, and there's a community in Boone County with very similar stories and problems from the injection. And, this is just the type of, just one story, or one community's story about what a corporation will do to their water and how hard they have to fight, how long they have to fight, and how many people end up sick and dead, to try to get some justice and clean water.
So you kind of touched on this a little bit, but could you tell us a little bit more about the sludge safety project's resolution that required the state to study the impacts of the underground sludge injection that was passed in 2007? I mean, you said it was banning all new.
Mm-hmm.
And
Right, that still stands, yeah. And honestly, at the moment, I don't know how much underground injection is still going on. Part of the sludge safety projects thing was to educate the legislators not just on what was happening to communities where they were allowing this kind of insane disposal of toxic coal waste to go on, but also to let them know that there were other methods, like there's a dry press that gets a lot of the water out, and instead of having to inject, toxic wastewater into underground, you can, store drier toxic waste that's not leaching into aquifers. So that was like, cost at that time about 50 cents more a ton to do the process that way. So, that was one of the aims of the Sludge Safety Project too, was not just to say, hey, stop doing this, but hey, look, you can also do something that's, you can still have your product, but you don't necessarily have to poison us as much.
So you also touched on this, the slurry pollution case.
Mm-hmm.
But is there anything else that you can think of? Any other cases?
Well, with that case, basically we networked the community members who were just so frustrated and upset. We networked with them, with some attorneys, and it was a multi-year case, 700 some families involved, and they did eventually settle, which, that's the aim of the court system, is to get people to settle and to get their differences worked out. So, in that way, Massey never had to really take responsibility for what it did, but there's all kinds of records that are public record now about what people went through, and it, it really in the end was inadequate for, but in any kind of case where you have to settle like that, in the end it's inadequate, if your family members have died and if your neighbors have died, and if the corporation has just gotten away with I don't know if it was outright murder, but people died and people got really sick, and that community is still struggling.
So what would you say to someone who said, well, why didn't they just move to a different place?
We hear a lot of times in issues of mountaintop removal or fracking or something like that, of people saying, well, if it's so bad, why don't you just move? Well, first of all, if someone asks you that, well, okay, so if someone moves next door to you and opens up a toxic waste pit, are you just going to move? And maybe someone, who's more mobile might well do that. But in West Virginia, we have communities and families that are so rooted in a sense of place, and have generations of people have grown up in this area, and there's a lot to be said for living in a community where, if you don't get home on time to greet your kids after school, that your neighbor's going to look out for them. There's the sense of the community, there's the lovely sense of place, and there's just like the sort of brutal injustice of that question of like, well, why don't you just pick up and move, And at a certain point, we're finding that you can't pick up and move off the planet. And, with mountaintop removal, with the coal slurry stuff, it was more localized. And now with the fracking issues, people around the nation and people around the planet are going, oh yeah, at a certain point there is no place to move if we don't start respecting our water. But that's just such a callous question, and perhaps for a lot of people it comes from innocence to ask that, but think it through. If you're suffering abuse, are you the one that's supposed to fix it? Yeah, you have to, but you don't fix it by moving away. You fix it by standing up and fighting and working for your community.
So what can you tell us about the chemical spill, kind of changing direction, and advocating for municipal water as opposed to privatized water?
So back in January of 2014, the MCHM chemical leak happened, and it might have been happening even more before that, but all of a sudden everybody noticed the odor, and I couldn't help thinking of folks living around impoundments and coal slurry sites, of them probably saying, oh, well, welcome to my world, because this chemical was a coal cleaning chemical. And it's leaching slowly into people's water in the coal fields of living around these impoundments. That and who knows what other chemicals they're using, because we tried to find out but couldn't because it's proprietary information. So, this massive chemical spill was kind of like, well, welcome to our world. This is what, here's the wake-up call of what we're doing to our water. So it was an amazing response from the activist community. Hang on a second. Put that in there. Okay. So the response when the MCHM crisis happened was, pretty amazing, because everybody that had been, all the progressive groups in West Virginia pretty much know each other, because it's a small state and sometimes we feel like we're a small handful of folks. But all organizational boundaries seemed to dissolve, and everybody just self-organized, started having conference calls, broke into different groups of ways people were going to deal with the assorted. If somebody's here actually just going to go deliver water, somebody's here is going to work on policy, so all these different groups got together, are self-organized, and people worked their butts off with very little sleep for about 3 months directly after the crisis. And what was, it as we see happens so often, people have day-to-day lives, people have so many concerns. But when a crisis happens, the good comes out in people and people mobilize. So it happened right during the legislative session. So people that weren't normally coming out to lobby or whatnot, they were in the halls at the session, and the legislators, the legislators were impacted too. The Capitol was shut down. There was no drinking water. The odor was hanging over the city. I went up and tried to take some photos near there, and the odor it drove me away. It made my throat so scratchy, and from a quick exposure. So, so people were motivated and out and about, and got some change. And got some great laws rules, on the books. But then the next year, the coal industry was back. The natural gas industry worried about the tank bill. They were back, and the people weren't as that'd been a year ago now. So people were back to their normal lives and not as motivated. And so slowly those gains have been draining away. So it's just like, we have to be on constant alert and constantly present to keep any gains we've made. I don't know if that answered your question.
No,
I think it went.
No, it's great. What similarities do you see between West Virginia and Flint?
Well, when what was going on with Flint was happening, we all the groups that had been involved in the water crisis sort of got together, wrote a sort of like solidarity letter to them, published it in a Flint paper, because it was so obvious that of the similarities of the low income communities being repositories for waste, or just being shunted.
Any photos that you have? Yeah, we took. We had some amazing shots of from the plane.
Yeah. So you went over the Brushy Fork coal slurry impoundment, right?
Yeah, we went.
The lake of goo, and probably the one above the school too.
Yes, you did one at the school.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Okay, so, when the Flint water crisis was going on in the news, all the groups that had worked on the water crisis here got together and wrote a letter, which we can share with you, just about the solidarity aspects of it, and the aspects of low-income communities being abused by corporations and ignored. So we hoped it was more than just a "we feel your pain" type of letter, but just to show the solidarity and that, we really need to network across state lines and across, sort of organizations and issues, just work for clean water. So we really did feel in solidarity and, really did feel what was going on with Flint was also happening here.
Did you get a response from them? Or?
Yeah, we did. I think we have it up on our blog and whatnot. A couple people wrote back, and so we haven't. And then also, a couple of our members had gone up and done some networking, and I think we actually had a couple of people here from Flint too. So just community members getting together and dialoguing.
So, could you tell us why clean water is a right?
We can't live without water, so it has to be a basic human right. We're so into technology, so far removed from what it takes to keep us alive. We're flabbergasted when something happens like what's happening in Puerto Rico, or I was going to say Puerto Rico, sorry, Puerto Rico. Sorry. But it's just a reminder that we're animals. We're part of nature. We have to have water to survive. How can water be monetized? It's just unfathomable.
Do you have any other thoughts you'd like to share with us?
Send water.
I have another question.
Sure.
What do you think needs to happen? It seems like we're very reactionary. This is
Mm-hmm.
just kind of my opinion. When a crisis happens, people as a whole
Right.
react to it.
Mm-hmm.
What do you think needs to happen to really create sustainable, lasting change,
Mm-hmm.
where this is not something that people have to feel like they're constantly fighting?
I think all of our work is. Let me start over. For humans to survive at this point, honestly, we have to have a sea change, a cultural sea change, or go back to times when we were more cognizant of the fact that we can't survive without water. We have to, get to a point in our culture where we value that which sustains life over money. Money is a human construct. The way our economy is set up is our construct and our choice. We've got to change it around so that, profit isn't the be-all and end-all. Human health and well-being and caring for one another. And I don't know. Are we capable? Right now, we seem to be swung way out on the pendulum of profit über alles with no basis in what is, biological reality. We have to change as a culture, and I'm pretty sure that involves each and every one of us.
That's good. So going off of that, what would you say to someone who wants to help advocate for clean water, whether it's in their community or in another community? What can people do?
To advocate for clean water, it's obviously a very local issue. So get involved on the local level. Find out where your water comes from. Find out what are the sources that are contaminating it, and find out, who in the community is working to improve the water quality. Figure out ways of conserving water, learn about rain barrels, learn about, how you can collect water, check in on your neighbors who have bills but can't meet them. I think one thing that would go a long way towards cleaning up our water is, cleaning up our energy sources and our, and are just endless more consumption patterns. So really the focus on sustainability, on sort of perhaps the models of zero growth, of, you know, that there's different ways to measure prosperity, and a lot of that is at the really local level, and that's great, because it's so much easier to work locally and think globally than work globally and think locally, you know. So.